and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the 18-hour show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this edition, we're going to take a hard look at a sector that has suddenly become the cynosure of all eyes, agriculture. Like the poor in India who suddenly come into their own only when elections are near, the agriculture sector in India is typically relegated to the back burner till, as I said, elections approach. And governments suddenly realize that a sector that supports close to 60% of the population has the potential to win or lose elections for them. And hence, we see a flurry of activity. This time around, the situation is more acute than normal because the inescapable signs of farmer distress spilling out onto our streets. And once again, we have reports that government is working on a farm package to alleviate stress in the sector. However, we're going to try and distance ourselves from any here and now package that typically offers only symptomatic relief and take a hard look instead at the underlying issues in the sector and try and draw up a viable long-term strategy. And to help me do that, we've got some of the best brains on the subject. Ashok Gulati, Infosys Chair Professor at AGRI, the Delhi-based think tank and a powerful votary for root and branch reform of agriculture, Pinaki Chakravarti, Professor NIPFP, the Delhi-based fiscal think tank, who as economic advisor to the 14th Finance Commission, knows better than most just where the shoe pinches when it comes to farm giveaways, quote unquote, and Pravesh Sharma, former bureaucrat and now co-founder and CEO, Kamatan Farm Tech Private Limited, an AGRI startup. Welcome to the show, all three of you. Let me start by asking each of you in turn, why is it that despite a steady increase in outlays for agriculture in successive budgets and a plethora of schemes, Fasal Bima Yojana, Asha, soil health cards, setting up Krishi Vigyan Kendras, measures to increase credit outflow to agriculture and so on, the condition of farmers is just not improved? Is it because long-term answers really lie outside the farm sector in providing jobs elsewhere in the economy, so the pressure on land comes down, the size of holdings, hence productivity increases and so on, whereas all the answers so far have been entirely agri-centric and piecemeal, and given our poor implementation record, are bound to fail. So what we really need is a holistic approach that looks beyond agriculture. Let me start with you, Ashok.
You know, the question that people have to move out of agriculture, that is very much true. And in most of the economies that has happened sooner or later, people have moved out of agriculture, whether it was China, whether it is US or more developed economies, everywhere that has happened. The issue for India is it a pull factor from other sectors so that farmers move on to higher productivity jobs which can give them better income? Do they have the skills for that? Or is it a push factor that there is nothing in agriculture left, so they will go anywhere on the roads and become coolies and other things? It is not that push factor that we want a pull factor. And for that, the non-farm economy has to do 2 times better than what it has been doing, creating more jobs for these people and creating more skills for these people to get employed in non-agriculture sector. But I would have one caveat, that within agriculture sector also there is a lot of scope to create employment in the rural areas if you start building value chains for different commodities, the way we did for milk. So aggregation, sorting, grading, all those things. It will be off farm but related to agriculture and strengthen the agriculture. So it can be a win-win situation, dovetailing the non-farm and the farm sector together as a winner for the farmers.
It has to be both within agriculture as well as outside agriculture. But Pinaki, the fact is that under the 7th schedule of our constitution, agriculture is a state subject. But every time farmers really want their voices to be heard, they come to Delhi. Why? Is it because they intuitively realize that even though agriculture is a state subject, the answers lie partly beyond the domain of state governments? In your interaction with state governments in the course of your work at the previous Finance Commission, is that the sense that you also got, Pinaki?
I believe that if we look at the aggregate public investment in agriculture, taking center and states for the last 10-15 years, this actually hasn't increased. In fact, if you look at as a percentage of GDP, aggregate investment in agriculture, public investment I'm talking about, has declined. There are a lot of central schemes that come up all the time in terms of both interventions as research as well as giving direct support to enhance agricultural economic activity at the central level can only work at the margin. I think if we have to really push agriculture in public investment to create kind of issues that Professor Gulati was talking about, building value chain. I think we need to have a national strategy where both center and states have to get involved. Just looking at the central finances or one or two states, we really cannot talk about what exactly has happened in agriculture. If there is a farm distress, and if we believe that it is true, then we need to also take a holistic view of the financing agricultural public investment, taking and center and states together. Just by looking at what central government does is not going to work.
Pravesh, would you agree with Pinaki? Is it time that we look beyond agriculture and beyond state governments for solutions? Would you agree with that assessment, Pravesh?
If I was to take Ashok's point further, and he's pointed out to the delayed structural adjustment in our economy, which means that we have too many people in agriculture, and of course, as economies have evolved, people have moved out of agriculture in large numbers, but for various reasons, the other two sectors have not been able to facilitate this shift. But I would like to place this discussion also in a somewhat policy context, and I'll relate it to what Pinaki said about policies. Ashok and other reputed economists besides Ashok have shown over the years that implicitly agriculture has suffered a taxation, even though agriculture income is not subject to taxation. But implicitly there has been around a 15% tax imposed on agriculture because of the pro-consumer policies that most governments since about the 60s have followed. And this has also, in my view, contributed significantly to the low level of capital formation, and therefore the low capacity of farmers to absorb new technology, to invest in near farm value addition and the kind of infrastructure that may have encouraged rural industries based on agricultural production. And while Pinaki is right, and you also said that agriculture is a state subject, but don't forget that agriculture as a sector is heavily impacted by the kind of monetary and fiscal policies which the center adopts. In addition, the center also controls trade policies, especially external trade. And all these typically have tended to look at agriculture as needing protection, as needing isolation virtually. And therefore, while industry and services have gradually aligned themselves with global markets, global norms, and have freely absorbed technologies and capital, the same has not happened in agriculture. And it is because of this delayed transformation within agriculture that its capacity to support, shall we say, more rewarding livelihoods has also been compromised.
Absolutely. I think all three of you are right in your own way. You've brought out very important aspects of the problem. But Ashok, the fact is, the logic of keeping agriculture in the state list is perhaps that we're a very diverse nation, soil climatically, size of agriculture, holdings, etc. And as such, maybe we can't really have a national agricultural policy, because what works for the farmer in the drier parts of, say, Vidarbha will not work for a farmer in the Indo-Gangetic plain. At the same time, as Pravesh said, trade, commerce, banking, these are all in the union list, which is why perhaps farmers expect relief in the union budget, either by way of loan waivers or an increase in the support price, with the result that agriculture, despite being a safe subject, has become much more than. So is it time we thought of something like a GST council, something I think that you've been talking about, where all states are represented and come to a consensus instead of the present situation where it's a race to the bottom, with one government after the other announcing things like farm loan waivers, free power, etc. Is it time we thought of something like that, Ashok?
Well, two things that I must clear. I'm not in support of farm loan waiver or free power that you mentioned. But don't think that any help that is being provided or being thought of by the center right now to get the agriculture sector out of the distress that it is suffering from, it is not a dole, it is what I call an atonement for not reforming agriculture. Pravesh mentioned that there is an implicit tax on the agriculture sector. We worked out for 17 years analysis with OECD, and OECD monitors 52 countries about their agriculture policies and what impact it has on their producers and consumers, what is called the producer support estimate. For 17 years, 2000 on to 16-17, there is a net taxation, what is called the producer support estimate, being negative to the tune of 14%, 14 point something percent per annum. Now, that translates into 2.65 trillion rupees per annum. For 17 years, actually it is 45 trillion, 45 lakh crores is the cumulative damage, or you have robbed, I would say, the peasantry by these hidden instruments, policy instruments, restrictive trade policy, restrictive marketing policies, Essential Commodities Act, and so on and so forth. You don't allow the private sector in a big way to come in. And therefore, because all these years the effort has been how to keep the prices low. Sure. And that is an inbuilt consumer bias in the system. We are ready to give 1,69,000 crores food subsidy to 67% of population, when rice is costing you 33 rupees and wheat is costing you 25 rupees, you want to give to the consumers at 2 rupees and 3 rupees. 1,69,000 crores is the consumer subsidy bill in the budget. 1,34,000 crores were unpaid bills of FCI. So I don't think it is a dole. That is, I feel that instead of loan waivers, you have a structured income or investment support policy for farmers for the next 5 years at least. For the damage you have done for 17 years, I think all the governments should agree to at least support farmers for the next 5 years.
Pravesh, very quickly, as somebody who has worked for long years, both at the center and at the union, would you agree that a coordinated action and a more nuanced action is the only way around? Very briefly, Pravesh.
Look, I don't think the silver bullet sort of solution to shift a subject to a central list will solve the problem. And I think India is too complex a country, and if you see the example of GST, where the states, after a period of engagement and negotiation, actually agreed to give up their taxation powers to subsume state level levies into the GST. Now, I think agriculture is also a similar subject which will require very close engagement. Sometimes people based in Delhi, and I think that civil servants are as guilty in this regard as sometimes the media is, we tend to see this whole problem as amenable to somewhat easy solutions, while actually it is not so. I think a long-term engagement on the lines that you have suggested, and which many of us support, the idea of a standing council chaired at a very senior political level at the center, which engages the states, looks at state level issues, state level problems, responds to situations like the current one. I can understand that economists may have great discomfort about the kind of giveaway that a loan waiver represents. But perhaps in the short run, it may be the sort of emergency response that becomes necessary. It's like recapitalizing a financial institution so that it remains solvent and viable. But I also agree that it is not a long-term solution, and we need to look at these solutions outside budgetary outlays. Most importantly, looking at the whole gamut and ecosystem of policies that we've created over the years, which are holding back, I think, the potential of agriculture to respond to the issue of livelihoods and jobs.
Indeed, we do need a holistic solution, but I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. Please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm in discussion with 3 experts on what can we do to really put the agriculture sector on its feet. Ashok, before the break, we were talking in terms of long-term remedies that are very necessary, but we also need to have some balm for the short-term pain. So what are the kind of short-term remedies that you would suggest? I know you've been arguing against farm loan waivers and in favor perhaps of a universal basic income, but how feasible is it, the Telangana or Odisha model? Which one would you prefer and why? Can we bear the fiscal burden, Ashok?
You know, the question of fiscal burden is one part of the story. And as I said, if for consumers we can give 1,69,000 crores every year as a food subsidy, then I think it's time to have some sort of an income/investment support policy for the next 5 years. And that should be the center and the states should pitch in together so that it is more structured, more stable, more predictable. And then also bring in the fertilizer subsidy on that. Also encourage the states to bring in power subsidy on that, which is a direct cash transferred to the farmers and then free up the prices, because there is a massive wastage and leakages that are taking place both in the fertilizer subsidy as well as in the power sector subsidy. So you will save quite a bit of that, and directly when you give to the farmers, they will use it much more optimally than through a highly subsidized prices of free power. They are depleting water table and so on and so forth. So I am in for whether it is the Telangana model or the Odisha model or the Jharkhand model or even the West Bengal model. Three of them are per acre basis. The Odisha one is on per family basis. I think more can be debated and improvised. Each model can be improvised, but definitely it's time to go for the next 5 years towards an income/investment policy approach.
Do we have the money? I mean, because there are various estimates floating around of the kind of money needed, and one might quibble about the exact numbers, but the fact is they're all pretty large amounts, unless, as Ashok says, we can simultaneously do away with all subsidies. But will that be politically feasible, Pinaki?
Well, I think, as I said, the fiscal impact, we really do not know. These numbers that are floating around, how valid these numbers are, what will be the actual outgo, we really do not have a clear idea. We would only have this idea when we have got the actual data available in terms of actual outgo of the loan waiver. That is one aspect of the story. So the impact on FISC of farm loan waiver, we really do not have a clear understanding first. Secondly, on investment in agriculture, subsidies to the power sector, direct agricultural subsidies, all of these are a major component of total expenditure that government does. And it definitely has an impact on FISC, and the impact is on the revenue expenditure side. So these are kind of current consumption expenditure. So it doesn't add to your investment and then to productive capacity. So we need to reform, and we see that we reduce these subsidies, and at the same time it does not actually reduce our actual productive investment flow to the agriculture. So idea of states now giving direct cash transfers like the state models that have been mentioned by the last speaker, I think we need to study them and whether we can really think of having it in more and more states. And again, remember that this is done by the state government, not by the central government. I am not proposing another centrally sponsored scheme to deal with agricultural distress. I think that we have done for a long time, it hasn't worked. So we need to allow the state's FISC to operate on its own and evolve strategies that suits the state, individual state priorities and demand, and that is where the solution lies. And as far as the national coordination is concerned, I think that should involve the national policies that affect agriculture, in turn affect state governments and state finances and the agricultural sector.
Okay. Pravesh, Pinaki spoke about the importance of state governments, and you were with the MP government for many years. And though the MP's Bhavantar Yogdan Yojana was earlier touted as one of the best answers, and agriculture frankly did do very well in MP for many years, it clearly did not address the root cause of the distress, because farmers in MP are among the most distressed today. So are all these schemes only temporary solutions? And what we really need is something that is a complete structural reform of agriculture. Pravesh?
Yes, I'd agree, and I think both Pinaki and Ashok have spoken about the basic universal income support scheme, so I won't say anything on that except to say that I don't believe that is a short-term option, because in the majority of states, and I speak with responsibility here, I do not think that the nature and the state of land records and their, I would say, very perilous sort of nature would allow a scheme of this nature to be rolled out. And I think we should be very careful and perhaps put in a period of an year or so to prepare digitized land records and digitized records of farmers before we roll out a national level scheme like this. On your other question, I would prefer to see short-term action in at least two key areas, which I believe would make a tremendous impact on farmers' incomes and their livelihoods. The one thing is access to institutional finance. Now, most of the data available with us suggests that especially among small and marginal farmers, the penetration of institutional working capital or short-term debt for agriculture is as low as around 15%. So if 85% of these smallholders are accessing credit from the informal market at rates of interest that begin at 24% can go up to more than 100%, then obviously there is no technology which can give them returns to service that kind of loan and have something left over for themselves. So I'd like to see action on linking smallholders to institutional finance and reducing the share of informal credit. That itself will make a majority of our smallholders viable cultivators, even at current price levels. The second part that I'd like to see is very concerted effort on marketing reform. Ashok mentioned the Essential Commodities Act. That's a central legislation which, if removed, will certainly incentivize the private sector to start buying at the back end and storing. But let's agree that that won't happen in the short term. In the short term, what we need is an abolition of the very restrictive practices which the whole APMC legislation has brought about in most of our major agricultural producing states. And this restriction is what is keeping bulk buyers. Now today there are pulse processors or oil processors who would happily buy at the farm gate but are prevented from doing so by the APMC legislation. And it is in these crops that we see a lot of distress, a lot of price crashes, gluts in the markets, farmers being forced to offload their product at something like 15% below MSP.
Very true, Pravesh. We do need to get market forces into agriculture. In fact, that brings me to my last question. Ashok, you've been a votary of leaving agriculture to market forces, but nowhere in the world really do you look at agriculture as being treated like non-agriculture, whether it is the US, Europe, Japan. So is it naive to expect that we in India can really have market forces playing in agriculture? Very quickly, Ashok.
Out of the 52 countries that OECD monitors on annual basis, which produce roughly 80% of the global production, except one or two, and India is that one which taxes its farmers heavily. All others are heavily subsidizing their farmers. This I am saying after doing a lot of work in this and after accounting for all the input subsidies. Even after accounting for input subsidies, the implicit tax is about 14.5%. So I think India has extraordinarily taxed its farmers, perhaps to help the poor consumers. But I think it has gone too far on that, and as a result of it, it has made its farmers poor. I think there is recalibration that is needed in the policy. Left the accelerator from the consumer side and put it on the farmer side, the producer side, who is taking all the risks.
Shifted focus away from the consumer and more towards the farmer. Maybe the government will do that and look at a long-term as well as short-term remedies for the sector. But thank you so much, all three of you, for joining me in this discussion. Hopefully, let's see what the government announces, and it will be a partial solution. Meanwhile, as the government works towards a fuller and final solution. Thank you very much, Ashok, Pravesh and Pinaki, for joining me in the discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.